Well, I love humor. And one of the nice things about meeting new friends is you can just tell them all the same jokes over and over, and they just think it's so great. Even old jokes like this one, they're just good. And so this guy is walking along the pasture, and he's not paying attention, and doesn't realize there's a cliff there. And all of a sudden, he finds himself about halfway down, holding onto a branch or a vine, and he can't climb up, and it's several hundred feet down to the bottom. And he does what all of us do, right? He says, help me, please, have someone help me. And he's crying out for help, and finally he hears a voice that says, "Fear not, I am here." Great, whoever you are, send down a rope. The voice says, "This is the Lord, your God." "Oh God, I'm so glad you're here to save me. Send someone, throw a rope." God says, "I've got this. Let go of the branch. I've got you." And the guy says, "Is there anybody else up there?" If sometimes people wonder, where should I start reading the Bible? The Proverbs is a great place. Maybe the book of Proverbs was written by one person who sat down and just wrote one after the next. But more likely, Proverbs is a collection of the wisdom of the Hebrew people. And so the Proverbs are all over the place, and you'll read them, and there's advice for all different kinds of things. And occasionally you'll run into one that doesn't seem to, well, how can that one be true if this one is true? For example, in 26, verse 4, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him." And then verse 5, "Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes." I think what the ancients would tell you is that they didn't worry about some of these seemingly contradiction things. They knew that sometimes one piece of advice might be needed in one time and another in another time. In our Western mind, we read the Bible and we want it just all to make just perfect sense, like a magic book. But the ancients were worried about the story. How is it that God is working, and what can we learn from what God has done in our lives and in the lives of others? I want to say to you today that trusting means that something's wrong. And I think if I think about this, it seems to make sense to me, because when everything's okay, we don't think about trusting. We don't have to practice trust. When things are great in our life, we just sing the song, zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay, my, oh my. It's a wonderful day. We have no problems. We don't need to trust. But the moment the concept of trust enters our brain, it is butting up against something, some circumstance that we don't like, something painful that's happening in our lives. And trust calls us to lean on God in spite of what's going on. So anytime you think of trust, just recognize that there are going to be problems along with that. And if you say, "God, help me to trust you more," what did the scripture say? Tribulation works patience. We learn to trust God through the difficulty that comes our ways. The Jewish people certainly did have and have had through the centuries all kinds of problems. We have problems too. Some of them are small and insignificant. On Tuesday, I was working on this sermon, and I had it in a document, and it was everything was there. It wasn't in the right order, and it didn't make sense in terms of the order that I wanted to have it in, but it was all right there. And I went and did something else and came back a little while later, and I deleted it by mistake. And so I went online, and I'm looking up for auto recovery and how do you do it, and figuring out what version of Word we have, and I couldn't do it. And at first I was panicked, but then I thought, sermons on trust, maybe it'll work out. Okay, so there are other problems that we have that are bigger and painful. My daughter, my second daughter, has moved to Florida, and that's an adjustment and painful. Happy for her. Well, these things that happen in our lives, change is so difficult. My son was in a car wreck last week, and well, those are more serious problems. But then you say, "Yeah, but he wasn't hurt." Well, you're right. And we know of people. Members of our church, one of their family members was murdered last week. I mean, there are really, really tragic things that happen to us, and we need to think whether our problems are large or small, how can we put these things in the hands of God? How can we learn to trust Him? I want to tell you today that trusting is a choice. You don't just walk down the road and say, oh, look, I found a bunch. Matt, look, I found some trust. Oh, I'm trusting God more. I found some trust on the ground. You choose trust or you don't. Now, most of us, our brains have defaulted to worry so much that it doesn't feel like we have a choice. Worry just consumes us, and our mind is just filled with all of this stuff that we're bothered by. But to trust is a choice. To choose in the middle of a circumstance that we have a choice in how we handle it and in what the outcome of this thing looks like. So I think of the Israelites in Egypt and the whole story of the Exodus. And Moses comes to the Israelites and say, hey, God's gonna deliver us. You've been here in slavery for 400 years. God's gonna lead us out. What's the first choice they have to make? That I'm going to trust this leader. That I am going to want to leave my current circumstance to go to something unknown. Do you know most human beings do not want to leave their current circumstance and go to something unknown? God has a very difficult time leading us anywhere because we don't want to leave Egypt. We cannot get our minds around even how broken and dysfunctional our lives may be. We can't get our minds around trusting God enough to go somewhere else. And so we live year after year, decade after decade with the same habits and the same practices and thinking the same way in our brain. God would many times invite us to leave the places where we suffer and the places of slavery and go somewhere else. If we're going to choose to trust God, we've got to choose to let go of some of the ways we think currently to follow Him. And then where does He lead us? Where did Moses take them? Out in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of the wilderness. And what's the first thing the people said? We want to go back to Egypt. This is really uncomfortable out in the wilderness. I mean, everything is different. Everything is broken and scary, and we don't like the food, and we're getting water from a rock. And at least in Egypt, we understood our life. So we have to choose in difficult times to be comfortable in the wilderness, to recognize that life isn't always going to be the way we want it to be. And it's very painful but true. There are lessons to be learned in the wilderness. Some people spend their whole lives fighting difficulty, just being angry that the world will not line up to make us happy. There are lessons in the wilderness. There are lessons in the difficult times. Are you facing a difficult time in your life? A very interesting thing to ask yourself is, what good can come of this thing? We don't even like to ask the question. What do you mean good? How can anything good? There's no good going to come from that. This is terrible. So someone asked me a few weeks ago how I was seeing the good with my wife gone as much as she is. And I've been looking at this because it's very easy. I mean, we're just so self-consumed. It's very easy to be unhappy and complain about everything that I don't want. But I have found at least one good thing about the distance and the time spent, and I want to share with you what it is. You know, before, and this probably isn't how your life works at all, but before, I would be working in the garage, and she would come home. She'd go, hey. I'd go, hey. Right? That's the greeting. Hey, hey. Right? Or I'd come in, and she's doing whatever she's doing. Hey, hey. We go about whatever we were doing. Now it's completely different. Now there is an appreciation that should be there all the time for all of us, but isn't quite as strong as other times. There's an anticipation, there's a longing. And now when I get off the plane and I walk through the airport and I see where the end of security is, and I know that she's going to be on the other side, there's this, how do you even explain it? There's this just celebration of hope, and I come around the corner and there she is, and I start to cry, and I go and I throw my arms around her, and it's just so wonderful. We should treat each other like this all the time. Life is too short for hey, huh. So in the midst of whatever wilderness you may be in, there are always good things if we will allow God to teach us. The other thing I would tell you about the wilderness is most of them never got to the promised land. We in our life, all right, God, here's what I want. Here's how I want it to go. And we think that we will arrive when life lines up just to suit us so. The Israelites in the wilderness, their journey wasn't about them getting what they wanted. Their journey was about them being with God. And in this life, if we would find hope in Him, we have to learn that the joy in life isn't about things necessarily going our way, but it's about us being with God. Lots of stories about this. There's a monk who decides he's going to leave the monastery and he's going to go find the meaning of life, and the abbot laughs and says, good, have fun with that. Send me notes, tell me how you're doing. So the monk goes to a faraway land and he's doing his thing, and a few months later he writes back and the abbot gets a note that says, I found the meaning of life. It's in service and caring for others. And the abbot laughs and tears it up and throws it away. Then a few months later, the monk writes again, and the abbot opens the letter, and the monk has written, I found the meaning of life. It's in introspection. It's in prayer. It's in a feeling in my heart. And the abbot tears it up and throws it away. And this goes on for a number of years until finally the abbot doesn't hear from the monk anymore. And a long time passes, and the abbot wonders what became of the monk, and a traveler's coming by the monastery, and the abbot finds out that the traveler's heading to the land where the monk went. And so the abbot says to the traveler, look for this monk, look for monk so-and-so. And if you see him, ask him how it's going. Ask him how he's doing in his journey. And so, the traveler goes and he finds the monk. And we know this because the abbot gets a note. And the abbot opens the note, and the monk has written, I give up. I can't find any answers. There's nothing in this life I can do but trust God. And the abbot says, yay, you finally get it. You finally get it. St. John of the Cross was a monk. 2 monk stories. How about that? This is a true story, actually. He was a monk in the 1500s, and he wanted to reform his order, and the other monks didn't like that, and so they imprisoned him. Not very nice monks, huh? They imprisoned him in a stone cell that he had to lay down in, not very big, like 4 feet by 4 feet and 8 feet long. It used to be a latrine. So this is just nasty. This is what the monks, his buddies, did to him because he kept wanting them to straighten up. He kept trying to get them to reform the order. They would bring him food, and every now and then they'd take him out, and they would beat him, and then they'd put him back in. And this went on for months and months and months. Months and months. You think you're having a bad day? Think you're having a bad week, a bad month? Years later, St. John would write, and he would say, there came a time when I wondered, God, have you given up on me? You ever feel like that? I wonder if God has given up on me. And then he said it got worse because I began to wonder if I had given up on God. Finally, he wrote, I realized there was nothing I could do of my circumstance, nothing I could do to change where this was, and I had no option other than to throw myself into the arms of this God that was bigger than this mess that was going on in my life. Friends, trust means that we come to the point where we stop trying to fix every single thing in our life and get it all to line up, and instead just throw ourselves into the arms of God. But we like so much to control the circumstance. In fact, if things don't go my way, I'm going to be upset. You ever get upset? You ever get angry? You ever react to something in life? I've talked to you from time to time about acting and reacting. I need to keep doing it till we get it just right. It's an important thing to think about. Most humans react. They see something they don't like and they're upset. I'm unhappy. It shouldn't be going this way. God, fix this. God, fix that. God, do this. God, do that. Have you ever allowed yourself to react to something and then been embarrassed about it later? You let something slip past your mouth or you did something, and then once you kind of cooled off, you were embarrassed because of what you did? That's the problem with reacting to everything. And that's the joy, of course, in learning to not react, but instead to stop. If we're not going to react, if we're going to act on the stage of life, we have to stop. And the first thing that means is close the mouth. Not easy to do. I mean, do you catch yourself sometimes going, oh, I gotta hold it back. I gotta hold it back. And you're angry and you want this stuff to come out of you. But if we're going to act, we stop. We stop. You still feel the same things, you still think the same things, but you stop and you step back, and you're giving yourself a little bit of time to come to a better place. Maybe you're going to count to 10. Maybe you're going to count to 50. Maybe you're going to count all day long. You ever have something that upset you so much that you have to sleep it off? Sometimes things happen to me, and it takes days to sleep it off. But finally, we come to a place where the energy, the anger, the frustration has kind of moved on, and then we can address it from the very best of who we are. And we see it not as something that hurts us particularly or something that we're emotionally responding to or emotionally all upset about, but we can pray and say, God, help me to handle this in a way that brings glory to you and shows your kindness. And we step out on the stage of life, and by the power of the Holy Spirit, we are acting as Christians instead of reacting and hurting folks along the way. Did I tell you that this sermon is 6 pages long? It is actually a world record, I think. What does it mean to be a Christian? Gosh, I love mission trips. I love Bible study. I love going to church. Some of you have your special seats that you sit in. Next week, sit somewhere else. Just mix around. Just sit somewhere different. Just mess with my brain. I'll go up and say, oh, have we met? And it'll just be because you're not sitting in your regular place. What does it mean to be a Christian? You know, when I was young, I thought I have a feeling inside my heart that I love God and I love Jesus, so I'm a Christian. And then as I grew older, I began to think, well, it's important how we live. Mission trips are important. Bible study, the outward things are important. What does it mean, though, if someone's a Christian and they do all those things, but inside their heart is filled with worry? They're just one giant ball of fear. You think that doesn't rub off on your children? You think that doesn't rub off on other people? Friends, it's possible not just that God will save us from our sins, but God will also save us from our fears. We were talking about a sports team. Now, this would never be true of the Royals. But, you know, people get so excited about their team. The Missouri Tigers or the Jayhawks or the Royals or the Cardinals or whoever. We're so excited. Aren't we excited? Yay, go! Fever. Yeah. What if you got that whole team together and got them out of uniform and dressed them in street clothes and just got to know them? You know, you might find that half of them aren't even very nice people. Yeah. Does that change how we feel about a team? But isn't it interesting how as Christians we do the outward things, and we're all excited about that, but inside, somehow it's okay for us to be filled with worry and fear. I want to encourage you to believe today and always, this is something I've been thinking about lately, is that God wants to change the way we live, not just on the outside, but also on the inside as well. A father was walking towards a rickety bridge with his young daughter, and he said to her, "Take my hand. We're coming to the bridge." And she said, "No, Dad. You take my hand." What's the difference? If I take his hand, I might let go. I might get distracted. I might forget what I was doing. But if the Father takes my hand, I know I am safe. Trust doesn't just mean you're holding on to God. Trust means believing that God is holding on to you, that He has an embrace of you that is bigger than whatever may be going on in your life. Trust means realizing that life isn't not just about the things that we're experiencing, but the great joy of life is us living this life with God. There was a poster in the 70s, "Life is a journey, not a destination." For the Israelites in the wilderness that never made it to the promised land, they still had a wonderful life with God with them. If you made a list of the 10 things in your life that you'd like to change, and I told you that none of them would ever happen, would you want to get a different life? I want to tell you that the joy in life isn't that things go the way we want them to go. The joy in life is that we are walking with God. There is someone that goes with us that is bigger than us. Someone in our heart that is bigger than our worries, bigger than our fears. Consider the migration of birds. It's quite amazing, actually. Twice a year, they go, "Hey, today's the day. We're going to go." "Where are we going?" "I don't know. We're going to follow the leader." Can you imagine the discussions? And birds aren't very smart, I don't think. But they do this every year. They have no maps, they have no GPS, and they just start to go. Inside of them, there's something that leads them. There's something that they rely on. Sometimes flying over water with no landmarks whatsoever, they go hundreds of miles and arrive at a new place. The spiritual life is such a journey. We are invited to take flight, to trust that God leads us and that God goes with us. We don't always understand what happens along the way. We don't understand the currents of the air or the storms that may blow. But we are living this life with God who is big and amazing and huge. And I want to invite you to believe today that God is bigger than whatever you are facing. Your problems may seem big, your issues may seem big, but God is bigger than whatever you are facing. That's why we can trust in Him. Trust in yourself, we know where that goes. Trust in someone else, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But God says you can put your trust in me. I am big enough. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to Him. He will make your paths straight. Let's pray.